and then hand it over to Antonio. Okay.
I'm here.
Antonio Pietro Latini would like to introduce.
Yes, thank you. Good evening for those who are in Istanbul. Good afternoon for Florida, and good morning for Oregon, where I am. I'm very grateful to Alessandro Kamitz for assigning me this privilege to introduce Andrés Duany. Although he doesn't need any presentation among those who deal with urban design. He's one of the individuals who contributed the most to the disciplinary development during the last 40 years. And since I don't want to take too many of the 45 minutes assigned to this presentation, I'll just read the short bio that I was provided and is there on the screen. Andrés' work focuses on town and regional planning. With Elisabeth Plater-Zyberg, they founded the practice DPZ in 1980 at the time of the design of the town of Seaside, which began an ongoing debate on the alternatives to suburban sprawl. DPZ has over 200 plans in the process of implementation. The firm has particular expertise in writing codes and is dedicated to both practice and research. Duany's books include Garden Cities Theory and Practice of Agrarian Urbanism, The Smart Growth Manual, Suburban Nation, The New Civic Art, and Landscape Urbanism and its discontents, and other ones in reality. Duany was one of the founders of the Congress for the New Urbanism, and CNU is an organization established in 1993 to promote walkable, resilient urban design. Duany has been a visiting professor at a number of universities in the United States. His work has been recognized by awards such as the Driehaus Prize, the Scully Prize, the Jefferson Medal, and the Brandeis Medal. Thank you, Andrés Duany. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I would like to congratulate those involved in this extremely prescient and complete seminar. I have to apologize that I've only been able to dip in and out of the marathon, the kind of Olympics of lectures that this represents, and I'm very grateful to be able to join it. Every time I joined in, I learned something, and that's I don't always say that. What I've been asked to speak about is to stick to the topic, and it is very, it's new to me. I am, as all of us with the pandemic, we're all essentially still amateurs. In our case, Elizabeth and mine, because our town plans require 10, 20, 30, 40 years to implement, like for example, Seaside that you referred to, is 30 years old and yet still under construction. Those who are in charge permit a great deal of deflection over the decades. And the work that we did was requested by the private sector. Okay, these developers who in an American competitive situation wanted to take an advantage, to have the advantage of having better ideas. Most ideas that American developers have are not very substantial or important. You know, it's golf courses and amusements and so forth. But this one seemed extremely interesting and serious. And we were retained to have ideas that could be implemented. Our first thought was, after floundering a little bit about what to do, and I'm going to describe that, the floundering, eventually we focused on the original pandemic, which is still almost in living memory in the United States, which is the Spanish flu of 1918, which is said to have killed 50 million people worldwide. In the United States, it was the response was very specific. And I would like to mention how healthy that was to our society. And it was like this. We must remember that in that pandemic of 1918, 1920, 1922, there were no vaccines. Okay, there wasn't the prospect of the vaccine, which permitted us to hope, some of us to hope for 1, 2, and 3 years for a solution that was non-physical, that would be medical. At the time, there was no prospect of the vaccine. And what was immediately tried out was what was known about tuberculosis, which was, as you probably know from the sanatoriums and the Alvar Aalto building at Paimio and so forth, it was all about fresh air and sunlight. And that is what was immediately implemented. You could see in the photographs of the hospitals, the windows open. You could see the schools, the elementary schools with the doors open, even in winter with the children in them. And so in the pursuit of sunlight and fresh air, at the regional level, what occurred in this country is there was a move south to what is called the Sun Belt. Now, I am in the state of Florida. The city of Miami began in the 20s. The city of Coral Gables began in the 20s. And one of the things that astonished me is it is in our myth that the Sun Belt, i.e. Florida, which is the hottest state in the Union, further south, began with the advent of air conditioning and the experience that many pilots training had in Florida in the Second World War. So without thinking very much, our myth was that air conditioning enabled Florida. But in fact, the new town where I live, which is an enormous new town called Coral Gables. In fact, in 1920, it was the largest in the world, projected in the world. The new town of Coral Gables and 17, 20 others by just one planner alone, John Nolan, was before air conditioning. People came to Florida, to the Sun Belt, because it was the only way they could get through the winter outdoors. Basically, if you stayed up north in the cold of New York, New England, Virginia, et cetera. And by the way, the United States is a cold continent. Okay, we have very little tropical south. People were forced to come south. And the advertisements, if you look at them, were both about health. They're always about health. And of course, because it's America, there's about investment. This is a good investment. But the health component in Miami was simply outdoor courtyards, outdoor dining, etc. This also occurred in California. We forget that in 1920, Los Angeles was a place, a kind of military outpost with a lot of Mexican immigrants and very little going on. If you look at the photographs, it was not unlike a kind of shanty town. Yet by 1927, 28, 29, 30, Los Angeles was one of the coolest cities in the world. That's where Hollywood was. You know, that's where it was glamorous. It had great architects. So in 10 years, essentially, the primacy of San Francisco actually came south to Los Angeles. So the first thing to notice is that the move was regional in the United States. And I do have some insight as to Europe and the advent of the Mediterranean littoral, the Nices and all this for the middle class, and also the Balearic Islands of Spain and southern Italy. And I remember Robert Graves reading his autobiography, speaking of oranges, so the mystical power of oranges, because that represented sunlight and the South. So the first thing that happened is the move south. Now, in the United States at this moment, and I don't know to what extent in Europe because we didn't track it, enormous number of people moved out of the cities and into many small towns in America on the Hudson River, outside of Washington, Virginia, everywhere. Many small towns in America that were actually vanishing received an incredible lease in life because of the migration of the people. Now, remember that Americans are migratory. We migrated from Europe and landed in the Northeast. We migrated over the Appalachians to the Midwest. We migrated to California. During the riots in 1968, we migrated to the suburbs. During the change, the deindustrialization, we migrated to the South and left the Sun Belt cities. Americans respond to trouble by moving away from trouble. Okay, now that's a huge difference from Europe. We do not have that agility in a place that is as stable as Europe. But American, we have, our ancestors moved and moved and moved. In fact, Americans move every 6 years. They change houses every 6 years. You can imagine what that represents. The second thing I found.
Are you going to show slides?
I'm going to show slides very quick. Okay, Liz is going to help me put slides on. Would you please?
Now?
Oh, yeah. The second thing we found is that in California, in Los Angeles, the platform for healthy living was based on modernist architecture. Okay, and somehow we all knew that, but when you actually look at the advertisements, we have to share content.
Excuse me, he's on a new computer, which has a different approach. So this may take a minute.
He just said we have to ask for content and it would open the. I'm going to keep speaking. When you look at the advertisements for the modernist architecture that was brought to Los Angeles, you don't have to. Okay. The modernist architecture that was brought to Los Angeles, several things. For example, the paradigm is the Lovell Beach House by Richard Neutra. And I'm going to show somewhere, I have slides of that. And this is what they brought. Huge areas of glass to let the sunlight in. They brought white walls without any moldings or ornaments because they could be wiped down. They brought floors that were not carpeted and didn't have seams, i.e. vinyl flooring, because the germs could live in the seams of porous stone. The American porch, which is a characteristic of American domestic architecture, which is a roofed outdoor space, disappeared and became the terrace. You do not find a modernist architecture in Los Angeles that has a porch. It only has terraces. The roof garden was institutionalized. The pool, houses had pools suddenly. Bathing suits became very quickly, remember in the 1920s, the bathing suits were very large. They covered your body for both men and women. And the bathing suits gradually became smaller and smaller so that more vitamin D could be absorbed, if you know what I mean. I don't know, do you think you want to do it in a conventional computer?
I don't know how to do it on this one, so I think you should.
Okay, I have a computer over there.
Okay, I'll start it, setting it up.
Okay. Share content.
Okay. Now you're visible, so.
Okay, I'm going to just try something. Okay, I'm sorry, but I have to go back to, this worked very well in the office, but Liz does not have a computer like mine. So where am I, Liz? How do I get back? Here? There.
You're here. See, you're
okay.
Here.
I'm there. Okay, so I have photographs, and sometimes I'm going to urge you to find the photographs yourself. If you look up Richard Neutra, the Lovell Beach House, the Lovell Beach House, I don't know where this is here now. It may not be there. Oh, there it is. Thank you so much. I read deeply. By the way, both these houses, okay, that's the Lovell Beach House, which was by Schindler. And you can see it's a health house, roof garden, etc., breezes, etc. An extraordinary house. The one by Richard Neutra is called just the Lovell Health House. If you would be kind enough to find the Lovell Health House by Richard Neutra. Okay, so here's a Lovell Health House, and you can see extraordinarily clearly the roof gardens, the huge grass, no porch, pools, etc. Now look also at the furniture, and this is rather unadvanced furniture, but I don't think we know or remember that the metal furniture with the strapped leather was also associated, was a polemic against stuffed furniture. furniture which is stuffed with and could therefore absorb, would have what may have thought of, they may have thought it was germs. They may not even have known about virus. So modern architecture came in. The typology, American modern architecture came in. The typology, the furnishings, the white, the vinyl floors, the absence of carpets came in on the platform of health. Absolutely clearly. I would say that it's possible that people did not even like these houses, and the first generation is notoriously uncomfortable, but it is possible that they didn't have a choice because health is actually crucial, as you know. So there we have a very interesting phenomenon. And so when we were asked by our clients, when we were asked by our clients to find a DNA for this, we actually tapped into the books of my period of education in the 1960s and 70s of the 1930s, and we found a lot of evidence, particularly in the work of Le Corbusier, with their, for example, his immeuble villas and his Villa Stein, with the very large double height outside spaces, with the sunlight that came in deeply. They were large enough to be furnished. They were large enough to have living rooms, to act like living rooms. They were large enough for exercise classes. And you see, there's the Villa Stein with a very large porch. And if you look at the immeuble villas, particularly the renderings, you will see people actually, there's a model of the immeuble villa, you would see people boxing and doing exercise in this double height space. We also saw that all of these buildings had cross ventilation, which means the double loaded corridor, which has become common with air conditioning, doesn't make sense, okay? So all of this DNA we took and we brought into the American development pattern. And if we ever get to see slides, we will be able to see the extent to which we absorbed, rather shamelessly, because of course I consider this to be traditional architecture by now, we absorbed the lessons of the 1930s and Richard Neutra, etc. Now, there's a couple of things I'm not going to show you because it's just too much, but the first thing that happened in the United States with COVID is, the first thing we noticed is that the doctors and the nurses, what we call the health workers, did not want to go home because they would have infected their families. And they were having a lot of trouble with that. And so the first thing we designed is a small, as it were, tiny house. You know what a tiny house is? In the United States, it's actually a code designation. And that tiny house on wheels would be parked on the parking lots of hospitals quite independently. And they were designed for long-term living by doctors and nurses, and even the people who actually made the beds, the caregivers. And these were quite special in the sense that they were comfortable. You could fully cook in them, because remember, at one point there was a tactile problem. We didn't know whether the surfaces were unhealthy, okay? And so, nothing, yeah. Okay, we're gonna have to,
Do you want to pause and we'll try to make this
okay,
work?
I'm gonna try and pause and we'll try to make this work, okay? Because I'm already showing you work that I have on images. Okay, what he said is that you open it and it'll go to the...
Wait, let's just turn it off for a minute.
You can join from the other computer as well and share the screen from that one computer, as long as you turn off the audio so that we don't have that feedback.
We're just going to take a 2-minute pause to see whether the lecture is on the other computer, and I will turn us off just for a minute.
Okay, sure. We're going to be waiting, but in the meanwhile,
it's new technology.
No problem, no problem. So, in the meanwhile, we can keep the discussion live, Antonio. Maybe we can make some comments on these few points. I might add that l'Esprit Nouveau, which is the first version of the Le Corbusier Manifesto, later on, coming up with the 5 points vers un'architecture, is 1921, basically the 2 years after the end of the Spanish flu. And therefore, that was in the air when Le Corbusier wrote L'Esprit Nouveau. But Antonio, let's keep it running. We don't want to keep the people in the silence while we're waiting. Oh, here it is. Okay, go.
All right. Thank you for the
Now what
pause.
do we do?
Now you can speak. You have it on the screen, is that correct?
But how do I move down? It's like, oh,
Yes, it's on
Okay,
screen.
like this.
See the two of you.
Okay.
It's fine.
so
Go ahead.
by the way, this is not, I'm going to work very quickly. This is not in order, but you can see there's one thing we added to this in the post that Le Corbusier did not have, which is actually because Florida is coastal, there's always a primary breeze. It's not like a proper city. There's a primary breeze that's very decisive. And so we have an echelon that brings in, that catches the breeze. Okay, and then it filters through the dwelling. But you can see that it's a double height space. And also that we have parking, and the parking lifts you from the ground. And of course, the passerby is, at least at the time, was thought to be a problem. You can still socialize very well from the second floor. This is developed architecturally, but not urbanistically. So you begin with parking in the first floor, and you can see that there are garage doors in the ones at the bottom because there's a great deal of paranoia. And you can see the little boxes at the top of the drawing where goods are delivered by Amazon, okay? And there's a primacy of taking stairs. The elevator is hidden, the stairs are more important. Second floor is like this, and you can see that there's an outdoor corridor and that there's an outdoor socializing area at some distance. You see the benches you can speak at that distance. And then when you enter the apartment, I think you can see there that there's a great deal, there's a room where you detox yourself, and it has a washer dryer and a sink, and it all has whatever you leave there, including your groceries, would be bathed with infrared, with ultraviolet light. So you wash yourself, you leave your clothing, you enter, you have the standard living room, dining, except notice that the living room is now facing a screen because it's about entertainment, because you stay at home, okay? That's what happened here. Notice that in the kitchen, it has now been evolved to have quite a lot of chairs because people work at homes and they like to be in the kitchen with computers. That's what those two little chairs are. Notice how large the dining room is. Because we began dining with friends, etc., with very large tables to distance. There's a large larder behind the kitchen to store food and to process it. The next thing, the floor above, you have the double height space, as you can see in the balcony, and then the suites are quite separate. Now notice the office. Do you see the office there in the upper corner? That's for people, let's say lawyers or somebody that might have to work with clients. They take the stairs up independently. That little core with the desk next to the fire stair is independent, okay, and then of course you keep going up and you keep going up, and eventually at the top you have a pool and a solarium. Okay, so that's one type. This is what it looks like, relatively easy to build and very American, sort of upper, obviously by European standards, this is very, very expensive. By American standards, this is middle class or upper middle class, okay? Because the wealthy actually just leave and they get their big estates. So this packs a lot of people with a lot of ventilation, and you can imagine people with their yoga classes and so forth being able to socialize outdoors in the patio. The key is to take the balcony seriously. In the United States, the balcony has become ornamental, just something that stores the sliding glass doors and resolves the issue of what the facade is to be. The outside space has to become fundamental. In fact, the dwelling must be designed around the double height space it has to be double height or it won't let enough sunlight in. And so that's the new typology. And of course, the revival of the one-sided outdoor corridor, which is associated only with social housing in the United States. Anybody in the middle class wants to have an air-conditioned corridor. And so that becomes, we're back at Team 10, as it were. Okay, so this is what it's like. There's a great deal of privacy from the balconies. They don't look at each other because of the echelon. Always happens with the echelon. As you can see, there's a lot of privacy. Relatively, it looks complex, but it's quite easy to build. Now, the second thing that, I don't know why I started with that, but I did, it's out of order. The second thing that happened in the United States is that our elderly started to die at tremendous rates. And it's a phenomenon in the United States that the elderly cannot live independently because of the automobile. The automobile does not allow them, they can't drive, okay? The old can't drive. And so they must be warehoused in a place where they're entertained and fed, et cetera, even though they're quite viable as walkers. So we have an enormous number of communities for people who are quite viable walking, but nevertheless cannot essentially live or feed themselves because of the car, and they can't drive. You know, at about 75, certainly by year 80, driving becomes dangerous and inexpensive. So we looked at I know that some of you, one of the lectures I saw were the monasteries. This actually was based on the Carthusian monasteries that we knew in England, in which the monks had L-shaped units. Notice that they face south, okay, that the courtyard is always facing south for air. This fits, what you're looking at there is a standard 200-foot block. This fits on 8 standard American lots of 50 by 100. What you're seeing is a portico, which is where you're processed, basically, that's the control and administration. That's where the nurse comes for the medicines, et cetera, for distance medicine. You have behind it, the long building is a socializing place where they also cook. And if you want to eat together, and then the other one is a series of, the third large building are rooms in which people can actually begin. They, as Americans often do, they create small clubs. Males do certain things, females do certain things, and the clubhouse as a social entity is very important. So we developed this. Here's the unit. Okay, it sleeps 2, and you can see that they have a limited number of guests. The courtyard is quite viable, you know, in terms of sociability for outdoors. The food is delivered. The little door that you see there behind the kitchen, the food is delivered to the kitchen, and you can pretend to be a cook if you don't want to join it, the large event. And this little module is very economical, and it can actually be assembled, as you can see, into something like the Beguinades, or like the Carthusian monasteries so admired by Le Corbusier. And I remember watching 2 or 3 of your presenters showing the response of the Middle Ages in terms of these kind of social entities, social units at the edge of the city, which I thought was very impressive. So here you are. It is actually quite acceptable to the neighbors because it looks like a single family house. Okay, so politically, it's really not a problem at all. And they're not expensive to build, but everything happens outside. Now, the standard North American house, the post-pandemic house, the first thing we noticed is that my neighbors that had garages could actually work in the garages, you know, they work at home, while Liz and I, who do not have a garage, ruined our living room and dining room full of books and papers and machines and computers. You know, we basically ruined our house for sociability by turning the living room and the dining room into office space. My friends who had garages turned their garages, and instead of the garage being the antisocial frontage of the house that you wish to put in the back of the house, it becomes the front of the house, the sociable front of the house. And so we had to redesign our typology to put the garage in front instead of in back, okay, which is completely against urbanism. In the United States, we put the garages in alleys, and now we put them in front because of the potential for convertibility. Now, these are the houses that we designed. Notice that now the porch is in the 2nd floor, okay, because again, there was a fear of the stranger in the 1st floor, but the garages are wider than usual, they're higher than usual, and they have quite good garage doors, which you can open as workplaces. You also enter in the middle where you're processed by an outdoor space, and I'll show you how this works. So here's the plan. You see the garages are wider and taller. They're really like lofts, and they're separate, so you can convert one of them into a workplace and not the other. So you enter in that little penetration in the middle. There's a cleanup room with a sink. That's where you leave all your stuff. That's where you leave. That has the ultraviolet light. And then you enter, and there's a kitchen. Of course, the sink is very important. There's a kitchen. Now, notice where the living room goes. The living room is this is not all American. It's centroidal Palladian. It's a Palladian partie for two reasons. One is by having two courtyards, we get cross ventilation. You open them up and you get cross ventilation, right? And then the other thing that happens is that the three bedrooms that you see are designed as complete suites for isolation. Do you remember how if you do catch COVID, you're supposed to isolate yourself? Well, this is actually what in Europe would be a bed sitting room, you know, complete with places to sit, storage, work, and so forth. So it's a complete transformation. The allocation to what we call the family room has now been allocated to separate bedrooms, which are like small apartments. And the courtyards, of course, you can enter directly from the courtyards. Now upstairs, we have a space that is just potential, is pure potential. You can do what you want there, from yoga classes to whatever you want. And there's the outdoor porch. Notice that the open to below is above the entry for cross ventilation. That bench outside, it does no good to meet outdoors if it's not cross ventilated. You always have to let the air out, which is why that open to below lets the air out, okay? So this is how the section works. In both instances, this is what the facade is like, which, by the way, is a generic American, semi-modernist, semi-traditionalist, definitely Sunbelt. This is a Sunbelt aesthetic. It's about the South, okay? There's a prejudice towards where the sun shines and where it's warm. That's why we have courtyards and open spaces. They stack at quite high density. You know, they basically touch, but they don't look like they touch. And there you have it. That is our single family house. Now, you might say, well, that's all very expensive. What do we do about the regular folk, the people who can't afford so much? Well, you may know that there's something called, that everybody loves, called this city that lasts for only 10 days, called Burning Man. And it's all outdoors. People live outdoors. They live in tiny, very wealthy people come to this, and they live in small units. But they have these super blocks, and we studied the super blocks, and we realized that the super block was many buildings deep, unlike the standard lot, the standard block, which has one house in which there's one frontage and then a backyard. This is a place that you filter through. It's a very large block, which if it were conventionally platted, would have no penetration. But in this case, you filter through socially, all the time living outdoors. And it turns out that people, when they arrive, they rotate their unit to form small communities to face towards each other. So we looked at that and we said, well, what can we do? And we tested with a project we were doing. We designed these super blocks, and we said, what if we design circular lots in which people would be, first of all, you filter through it. You don't have to stay on the street, but you were allowed to form a sub-community. And this was accepted as quite interesting. We also, you see there it is detailed. Okay, so you can't rotate your building. You have to design it from the beginning, rotating the place you want. It's not on a pinwheel. And this is what it looks like, of course, full of shade, etc. Okay, you see quite a Floridian operation. I think what's radical about this is not that the units are allowed to face each other, but that you filter right through the block. Now, if you look at where property like this in the single family house doesn't exist, it's only in two instances, only two. The first one is Tony Garnier's Cité Industrielle, which of course which have, as you know, that he has little patio houses that have concrete. You notice that there's no property line, there's no front and back, because it was socially held land. It was a socialist urbanism. The other place where this happens in the United States is the military bases, because the military bases, you don't really own your houses. Yes, our soldiers live in houses. Otherwise, you couldn't recruit their families to join them, but they don't have property lines and fences. The reason is that you can't mow the lawn. The army cannot mow the lawn sufficiently. So you filter through them and there's substantially more. So we took that on, okay? And this is what we took. These are some of the drawings that we did to appeal to our client. But this was the fundamental idea. This is in Sweden. It's a very famous garden designed in the 1920s. And I forget the name, I'm sorry. Our client would not want to know the name or even know that it's in Sweden. So we just called the whole thing a purple tulip. That was the name of the project. But notice that with a little bit of mounding and a little bit of hedges, you create a place which is loosely defined. There's a perimeter that says you may or may not enter, but you can filter right through it. You see, it's incredibly clever that you get it both ways. Yes, you do get your yard, but you get the full sociability, which would be impossible, rather oppressive in a very large block. And this is what it looks like. It's an absolute delight. These are contemporary photographs. And of course, what we did is exactly the same thing. We actually built a berm. We put the buildings within it. You know, that's where we lay the palm trees. And you can do all sorts of buildings. You know, this is a single house, very inexpensive. This is a house with an outbuilding. This is a house with 2 outbuildings. This is, 2 stories. There's an infinity of programs, all of which are very economical. Now, remember that land is economical in the United States. Building is not. So when you say, well, this is so wasteful, what mostly you must confront is that in the United States, unless you're attached to a successful city like Washington, Boston, Los Angeles, San Francisco, New York, land is very inexpensive and people are leaving anyway to go into the countryside. And this is a high density and very diverse by countryside standards, okay? So you look at this, this is a co-housing. You know, you can make little compounds all within your round thing. There's an incredible agility to the round block. You really don't have to think very much about it. And on we went on. And of course, there's the traditional American view. And because new urbanists are actually agnostic to style, we always have to do a modernist one. This one with solar devices, etc. Okay, we just present this way. And I have to say that this is actually quite innovative and worth doing, even without the pandemic. Now, the live work unit, what we did, normally we have the townhouse in front and the workplace is in the back above the garage. In this case, we reversed it and this is for a specific project that has this style. It's called Alice, A-L-Y-S, and it's this particular style. And so in this one, the workplace is in the front or whatever, the secondary apartment. So you don't have to penetrate the house to get to the rear, which is normally the American outbuilding is in the back. In this case, the outbuilding is in the front. We've reversed it. And so here you have it. You have the multidisciplinary or the equipotential space in the front. You can enter directly or from the inside. Now, this is what happens that's interesting. Normally in a townhouse, you cannot open the living room to the front because that's on the sidewalk. Okay, so it just drives the social space to the rear yard. In this case, because the living room where the couch is protected by the early building, you can open it to the front, you see? And so there's this very interesting reversal. What we found, and I'm going to repeat this several times, that these ideas are of value regardless of the pandemic. The fact that the living room can open to the front, etc., is very interesting. Of course, the upstairs is the normal economical 3-bedroom. This is what they look like. Remember, we are agnostic to style. This happens to be the style of one of our projects called Alice. Okay. Now, the compound is something in which you can assemble your own community. We believe that there's a future in this. We believe that it actually is the normal way for humanity to live. The Chinese live in hutongs. Out west, you live in a rancho. There are estancias in Latin America, and even the palazzos of Italy are entire societies that are assembled with their wealthy, less wealthy, younger and older servants, workplaces, etc. So we developed, what happens here? And this is what they look like in the West. Okay, this is a comparison. What you have above, anyway, this is a comparison that says that as long as you keep the number of bedrooms and bathrooms steady, you're allowed to disaggregate the program, which is normally built in a McMansion, which is quite elaborate and duplicative with bathrooms and bedrooms and 3 places to eat. As long as you do not exceed that program, you can assemble it into as many as 6 buildings. This is a comparison that shows that. And you go through a selection process like you would buy a BMW, in which it's a decision tree. And here you're allowed to decide which main house you have, which secondary house, which dormitory you want, etc. Here you have each line is a selection process, like when you buy a house. And you select this, for example, you select these 2. This is the principal house. You select as many secondary dormitories as you like. You select garages, which are really workshops. You select larders and separate office buildings. And then you select, if you have the money, you select a common outdoor pavilion with a pool, and you select your lot, and then you assemble it. This is what you bought. It's got a price, and then you assemble it into a compound. So this gives the person who is actually leaving society the ability to restore their society in a very old system of collective. It's like a very small hamlet. And of course, this would be accreted to other hamlets to create a town. This does not exist and has not existed since the 1930s in America or actually anywhere else. And there they are, the compounds. So you can actually assemble your own society. At the moment, everybody has to live indoors in their own society. Those are the principal things that I wanted to show you. I don't believe I have anything left that I forgot. No, that's it. We have just a few minutes to finish. Oh, I was going to say one more thing. A lot of the activity, which I don't need to show you, is the recovery of the public streets for pedestrian use. Where in New York City and Miami and many other cities, people took over the parking spaces for cafes and outdoor dining. And that is so well documented that I did not feel I had to show you that. Of course, that's probably the single most important thing that happened as a result of the pandemic. Everything I've shown you is secondary, but nevertheless, it's of some interest to, I think that many of these ideas are worth doing, pandemic or not. They've reminded us of quite nice places to live. And perhaps we should restore that DNA. Thank you. So I'm finished.
Thank you very much for your so insightful presentation, which, Pietro, are you there, Pietro? Okay, I'll do this.
Antonio, you were calling me, right?
Yes, you're the presenter. So you want to?
I don't know if we have time.
We do.
I found these projects lovely, not only in the detailed projects themselves, but for the message that they carry. And for the sake of discussion, I don't know if Mosè is still around, but I have to say that with all affection, I fully disagree with his position when he says that we have to stop building. This is a position that has a lot of currency in my poor country, Italy, but is absolutely unsustainable. Because as Andrés has explained, people not only in the United States, also in Europe, tend to be nomadic, tend to follow needs, work, ambitions, and they have ever-changing needs. So the role of designers is to respond to these needs, and responding means building with sobriety, with parsimony, but inventing new solutions like the ones that we saw and many others. So I think that, you know, there is a sort of a very dangerous trend in which we change narratives, we change representations, but we gave up changing the world for the better. And I really hope that instead we start doing that again.
Sorry, I got a question for André, which is basically, so it seems like every time there's a big pandemic, there's a complete change of style. Let me give you 3 examples. After the Justinianic plague was the end of the Roman Hellenistic world, the Middle Ages began. After the Black Death, it was the end of the Middle Ages. Renaissance came in. After the Spanish flu, it was the end of neoclassicism, historical styles, and the modernist style came in. So the question is, what is the next style?
What an interesting and unexpected question. In the United States, styles come in waves, and we are now in the waning of the neo-traditionalism. Okay, the dominant magazine was called, well, in Europe it would be Côte Sud. You know, every Côte Sud, the traditional, wonderful, you know, traditional houses. In the United States, it was, oh, I even forget, Southern Living, etc. But Dwell, the magazine Dwell, which is essentially modernist, in it with a kind of 50s aesthetic, 1950s aesthetic, lots of glass, sliding glass doors, simple boxes, is now 3 times the size. So without the pandemic, there was something happening about a lot more light and air anyway. And I'm not sure that our ideas would have been accepted by the market if the market weren't already going that way anyway. The young people do not want to live with oak cabinets. They don't want to live in dark houses with small windows. They want to have much more complex societies that they assemble themselves, you know, and I mentioned in the last one. So I'm not sure this, I think the style is going to change. And I know that that's the question you asked. I think the typology is going to change. I would actually dust off, as they say, 1920s white, sober modernism with lots of glass. Exactly. I think we need to study not just the 1950s revival, you know, the Philip Johnson houses, the glass houses, but the much more forgiving international style, which is much more forgiving, much more agile, much easier to build, and not high tech. I mean, only the window has to be high tech. Nothing about the international style is high tech. In fact, it's notoriously low tech and quite affordable. It's only the windows. In fact, it's only the sliding glass doors that are expensive. But I think the idea of glass and simplicity, etc., is the coming style. I would bet on that. Risky bet.
Okay, thank you. So I wonder if anyone else would like to comment or ask questions on this lecture.
Oh, I just want to quickly echo Andrew's comments on the style of the housing in the US, because right now I'm living in a small college town. And I do notice the change of the style for young people they preferred. And as Andrew pointed out, land in the US is very cheap. So people used to live in very big, large single-family housing. But nowadays, and also echo what Andrew mentioned, there are many people move from big cities to those small towns to see better quality of life. So we start to see this significant change. There are more and more higher dense housing, rather than in the past you have the big housing, occupy big land, you are far away from your neighbor. I have some colleagues, they have to driving to pick up their mail. Can you believe that? You have to drive like 5 minutes to pick up their mail from their mailbox. So by nowadays, we have the housing that are really close to each other, and that brings a lot of sharing experience. So there are a lot of sharing opportunities.
Yeah.
I think that will be a new change for the future American housing.
Yeah, yeah. I think the compound really has a future. You know, instead of, you know, a McMansion in North Dallas, you know what I mean by McMansion, right?
Yeah,
Both of you, most of you wouldn't want to visit one because it's grotesque. Now, the exterior is grotesque. Inside is quite comfortable and generous. But some of them have 5 and 6 bedrooms, 5 and 6 bathrooms, 3 places to eat, a gymnasium. You know, they're fully programmed. And if you take that same program apart and say, do what, and by the way, 3 and 4 car garages. If you take that program apart and say, instead of building it in one lump, separate it into as many as 6 buildings, don't exceed the impact of water that you use or heat that you use or school children that you have. In other words, keep it within the statistical performance of the McMansion, but disaggregate it so you can form your own society. What is the problem with that? You know, I think that is extraordinary to be able to do that.
Right. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you, Andrew. Yeah, go ahead.
No, that's it. I was going to say that. Oh, by the way, I have to say one thing personally. I've always thought I was a virtuous architect in the sense that I always took care of solar orientation and cross ventilation and so forth. Well, it turns out I wasn't. It's only when you begin with you know, our house is more or less cross ventilated, more or less we're oriented. But unless you begin, with designing the outside space first, not last, unless you begin with cross ventilation first, not last, unless you begin with the solar orientation first and not last, believe it or not, you're not doing your job. I thought I was, but it was a fantasy. We all think we're doing it, but we're not unless we begin with those 3. And that for me was an extraordinary aha moment. I had actually become inadvertently part of the problem as I became more and more expert in kitchens and closets and L-shaped couches and TV rooms and, you know, stuff like that. You know, I had forgotten the fundamentals, and this really alerted me to how you actually begin designing a building.
Andrew, I just want to make a quick compliment to your presentation, because I think, I know a lot from what you present talking about the housings. And I discovered that there's like a certain kind of movement. And I don't know if movement is the right term to call it, but it looks like the housing changing is become a little bit more decentralized. You know, in the past, we have this like all centralized amenity, but from your design or also from my experience of the recent housing change, I see all those amenities start to be more decentralized. And we just shifted this kind of like a main focus. For example, the living room is not in the main center of the room. I think in your design also showing that there are many other things besides the living room, like the courtyard, like some of the patio, like the balcony, actually perform the same way like the living room do. So I feel there's like more like a decentralized shift of the housing.
Reallocating, you know, the family room, which is duplicative to the living room. If you reallocate that budget of the family room to the bedrooms so that each bedroom becomes a suite, right? Like I showed in that house, that is also another form. That's the most elemental form of decentralization. And it allows actually quite a lot of privacy that most American houses don't have. You know, it's by the way, one thing I was going to add to this becomes very heavily involved with climate change almost immediately. And this is how it goes. In America, we have 5 problems: flood, fire, windstorm, hurricanes and drought, and migration. You guys over there in Europe have migration. You know, we have a very, very hostile nature here. We always see the maps of where the floods are going to be, the hurricanes are going to be, the drought is going to be, the fire is going to be, and the heat wave. If you overlap those red zones, those dangerous zones, and you see what's left over in the continent and do what we call a green map, there's a huge amount of land that is much better to live in than the ones that are subject to climate change effects. This is an incredible amount of good news for the American small town. We have thousands of American small towns of quite good quality that are actually in the process of being abandoned, and suddenly they have value because they're not in the path of trouble. And Liz and I discuss this constantly. We think that the real map of America are the sending areas and the receiving areas. That is the fundamental map. Where are people going to go next? Because, you know, Miami, where I live, is unsustainable. I mean, in the end, we're going to flood, right? Everybody knows that. So where are we going to go? Who has mapped that? Where do you go? How far do you have to go? You know, that kind of question is terribly interesting. And it's a new kind of mapping and a new kind of regional planning. And by the way, we don't have to induce it. People will naturally do it. People will move. We don't have to incentivize them to move. It's what they do naturally. Oh my God, what's that? We've been hijacked by the CNU.
No, it's me. It's our son.
Oh.
No, I want to just, you know, make a spot. Can I do that?
Okay. Yeah, please.
No, my final comment. I don't know if there's anyone else in the chat. I didn't read the chat. Now, in the 2 years of the pandemics, lockdown, etc., we have been facing a lot of removal. What Freud calls undoing. People saying, no, there's no pandemics, you know, negating the fact that there's a problem. You know, negationist theories, all that. But when we come to architects, we have seen a lot of that as well. And in my perception, the CNU was the only international institution that was looking into the issue of, you know, pandemics and urban design. And within that institution, Andrés Duany was the only one, you know, the only one I knew that was doing some design, you know, so not just speculating, but doing design of buildings that could solve some of the problems coming up from the pandemics. And this is why I decided to invite you from the very beginning, because I know, I saw your lecture at the CNU, and I know, I mean, maybe there is someone else, but I didn't see anyone else in the world in these 2 years, you know, coming up with solutions, architectural solutions. This is what designers do. They find solutions for problems. Now, there's a new problem, the pandemic. Let's find a solution. So thanks for that, okay?
Well, for me, it was an incentive to do better work. I haven't had to rethink things as thoroughly, even with climate change, as I have when this crisis came up. It dislodged a lot of certainties in our practice. Well, thank you for that.
Thank you for joining us. And so let's see if there's anyone else who would like to make a comment, or let's see, we can pull down this. Okay, that was a spot. Anyone else who would like to make a comment or question, you're welcome to do so.
Hello.
Yes.
Yes. Yes. This for Andrés. Yeah. Yeah. This is Jitendra from India. So you mentioned that the markets are allowing such projects, and so could you talk about that? What do you mean by that?
Okay. There is a, you know, let me use a very modern word. In the United States, normally, there is a choice where you live. You know, once you qualify for a mortgage, once you have enough money to make a monthly payment, there isn't just one thing. There's usually very many projects competing for you. In Europe, there's almost always a scarcity of housing, and obviously in the other parts of the world. And so if you find any flat in London, you say, I'm so grateful to find a flat in London. In the United States, even, for example, the lady that cleans our house, once she qualified for a mortgage, she had a down payment and she had enough of a steady salary, she had 5 or 6 projects to choose from. And so American development is very competitive. And what they concentrate on is what do you get in addition to what you buy? And that's called an amenity. Okay, so here's your house. It's 1,800 square feet and it costs $300,000 and you get a golf course, okay? Or you get a pool, and you get a beautiful view, and you get a beach, and you get a nearby school, okay? It's always what is additional. And that's very peculiar. It's called an amenity, okay? One of the things that is emerging is health. No American wants to die. It's a ridiculous fantasy. And so we're very, very health conscious in an obsessive way. And if you can be healthier, in other words, one of the most important things you can provide as an amenity is health. And because the pandemic is about health, and people were very scared about that, this is a very strong amenity. This will sell real estate, okay? In other words, when you walk into an American sales office, you have to have a narrative. They'll come in and say, sure, you got 1,800 square feet. Sure, it's $300,000. I have 5 brochures that I picked up today with exactly the same thing. What else are you offering me? And this is one of those amenities. This is a narrative that you can give to a buyer and say, look, this is healthy for you. Now, in the end, what they're going to fall in love with is the sunlight, the air, the courtyards, the flexibility of the, in the end, that's what they're going to love. Okay? Just like I was forced to think this way because of the pandemic, but it's not the main thing. The main thing is that we now have compounds to show. You see, that was a major dislodging of our practice. And we needed it. We needed it. We were very climate change. That's another one that has affected architecture. Normally, mostly ornamentally, I have to say, but it's good for architecture to be challenged that way, as we know. So this disruption, most architects love the thought of disruption, and they do it by just formal manipulation. Well, I just disrupted that museum by sticking something through it. Well, that's absolutely superficial. This is a real medical disruption. And by the way, I do think we're going to have another disruption coming up, which is social instability. Okay, social instability, forget about it. It's happening south of us. We're very sensitive to it in the South because of the immigrants. 1 million immigrants from country, and they're like us. They're not so different. And yet their countries fell apart, and they're coming afraid of social instability. I think there's a word, anomie. The professors, anomie, ANOMIE. It's a very interesting word that actually talks about the withdrawal of standards that cause social instability. It was introduced in the 30s in France. It's not an old word. And that kind of instability is going to, I think, affect urbanism. Now, we know what that means. More courtyard houses. Wonderful. Great. More close by schools that the kids can walk to without leaving the supervision of the community. So all of this instability, I think the word solutions, this solution carries with it some very, very intriguing creativity. We do need disruptions, we architects. If we don't have disruptions, we invent stupid disruptions that are not true. And now we have several actual disruptions coming, and that's very interesting. Should be.
Oh, I just want to quickly follow up on Andrew's comments. I think many developers have this famous motto: location, location, location.
Yeah.
I think we should refer to the accessibility to the amenities.
Andrés, by the way, your camera is off. Is that something you want to be, or the camera is off?
My what is off?
The camera.
Oh, I don't know how to turn it on.
Okay, no problem. Just want to
Okay, start video. I got it. Here it is. There it is, Liz. Wait. Am I on now?
Apparently not. Now you are, yes.
Okay, great. Here I am. Sorry about that. I thought I was on. By the way, if I sound surreal, speaking of social instability, remember I'm primarily an urbanist. Okay, and for me, the present is the distortion field. An architect has to deliver a project within 3 years usually. An urbanist has to think forward 30 years and then work back. Okay, so when I see a 20-year-old, like these beautiful young people here, I actually look at you as 50-year-olds. And I'm much more interested in speaking to 20-year-olds because they're the people who will be in control of these political entities called towns than I am interested in 50-year-olds that will be 80 years old and completely signing off. So my surreal, sometimes I sound insane, but that's because I'm not looking at the present. The discipline after 45 years of practice is actually looking into the future and say, what is it going to be like 30 years from now? And then working back to the present. While as an architect, you have to deliver within 2 or 3 years. It's a very different discipline. And when I say there's going to be social instability, it's not now. We can step outside anytime we want at night without even thinking about it. But that's not the evidence from very civilized cities in Latin America, very close to us. You know, Mexico is a civilized country. You know, and it's absolutely falling apart very quickly, the cities. So we have to notice that. They are our canaries in the mine shaft. And I'm not being pessimistic, I'm actually being stimulated by this and to see what good can come of it. Among other things, to survive difficult times, you need intense diversity. You need diversity of food, energy, water, and you need diversity of skills, and you need diversity of ages, and you need diversity of incomes, okay? In the United States, we hate social diversity. We want to try to keep different people out. In the future, you cannot survive without social diversity, okay? Somebody has to be young and be a warrior, and somebody has to be older and teach the younger people how to read, and somebody needs to be wise, and somebody needs to be amusing, okay? And somebody, all these things, you need this social diversity. If you actually make the American monoculture, which is now in some ways the ideal of the market, the monoculture subdivisions, you can't survive. So I think that the future difficult times will lead to a very high degree of diversity just to survive them.
Alessandro, I don't know if I can add to this.
Yes, you want to wrap it up?
I think, in fact, that diversity and variety is you know, the key words for the future and the one that we should look at. And as we allow for and invest on variety, in social variety, we should provide also a variety in our built landscape. We need different options, different solutions for different people. This comes from long ago. We read Alberti like zillion years ago, telling us people are different and therefore we have to provide differences.
Yeah.
And I would add, for many decades, we had the myth of the tailor-made. We cannot afford it anymore. We have to be redundant because we don't know exactly what will happen in the future. And in order to respond, we have to be redundant. So redundance, I think, is the other key word for the future. And it has to do with our job, which is designing. the future.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Interesting word. I hadn't thought of it. Redundancy, yes. It's what they build into stressed organisms like spaceships and jet fighters. Yeah, redundancy. Very interesting. Yeah, hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, build an extra room in your house, so you never know what you're going to do with it. That's the idea.
Yeah, yeah. Redundant skills. We don't know that you might be necessary. Yeah, yeah. No, it's a very interesting word, actually. Yeah, I think stressed situations are our future. And by the way, another thing that's very interesting, many of the problems of the world cannot be solved at our scale. Like climate mitigation is a worldwide problem with solution at the highest levels of policy. Adaptation is a very local, can be resolved easily locally. It's very empowering locally, and most of the tools are at our scale of operation as urbanists. You know, if you're going to, mitigation requires presidents and the United Nations and scientists to meet and convince each other. Adaptation requires us, the designers. And I think we should focus more on adaptation than we have in the past, the architects, you know?
Absolutely, and it's proven that resources invested in adaptations are much more effective than the ones, and much more, you know, at quick response than the ones that are, you know, that we have to invest on mitigation as well, but we cannot afford just to bet on that part.
Well, mitigation has a slight problem, which is as long as it maintains a great deal of hope up, and every book I've ever read gives you bad news and then speaks about hope, it doesn't catalyze the need to act. Like, oh, there's going to be an invention, or somebody's already working on it, or the next United Nations conference. Like, I think the idea of hope, which is intrinsic to mitigation, prevents people from actually acting now. It's part of the problem, that a lot of people are fluffing up hope when we should actually say there's not, you know, it's going to end badly, so let's get to work, you know. It's what I call a Pearl Harbor moment. We knew there were wars all over the world, but until the Pearl Harbor moment happened, the United States did not act. And we haven't had this Pearl Harbor moment. I mean, unless the Ukraine war is a Pearl Harbor moment, I don't know. But we haven't had that moment. Maybe the Ukraine war, with all the mess with the oil and the petroleum and everything it's revealed, that might be the Pearl Harbor moment. You know, maybe we're finally there.
Okay, thank you very much, Andrea. And Elizabeth, is she still there?
No, she's okay. In her own class, actually.
Could you bring her my regards and special
I will.
thanks? And
I will.
Okay, I hope we can do more of this in the future. Well,
Yes.
We might be considering pandemics in one form to the revenge, but not now. We will be busy with the proceedings of the conference, for which I will invite the key speeches, so including Andrea, to submit, if you wish, a paper for the publication, and everyone else also. So with having this said, we can thank everyone and remind once more that there's a delegate package for all those who have not downloaded the delegate package. I'm going to post a link in the chat, so that you can download the delegate package, which contains a lot of stuff, including the book of abstracts of this conference. And for the proceedings, we're going to have to wait until spring 2023 with the help of the publisher.
Well, thank you for running it. Thank you.